When Congress allocated the $700 billion, one of the very few indications of direction that it gave was do something about mortgage foreclosures. Not one step was taken in that direction under Secretary Paulson. Not one.
My goal was in 10 years that my soup kitchen would be a museum, that we would have figured out a way to address the needs of the people who were homeless. And now I'm just trying to think, how will I feed people tomorrow?
Literally a year ago, to do 100 properties, 150, 175 properties in a day, we would have considered to be a very large auction. And now we'll do anywhere from 200 to 350 homes in a day.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports. Good evening. Tonight, some sobering straight talk about the United States economy. We aim on this broadcast to give you in-depth reporting, but also analysis, perspective, and context. We don't aim to be alarmist, but what you're about to hear tonight is worrisome and worth pondering. Here's a perfect example of what makes this a very troubling time. This is a neighborhood outside Fort Myers, Florida, but it could be many places in America. The signs are the same. Foreclosures are everywhere. Neighborhoods wiped out. More than 10,000 a day. That's right, 10,000 homes a day are taken back by banks across the country. In January, for the 10th month in a row, there were again more than 250,000 foreclosure filings. 1 in 6 American homeowners is underwater, a term used in the real estate industry that means the homeowners owe more than the home is worth. 1 in 6. In 2008, more than $3 trillion was lost in home value in America. $80,000 practically free, ladies and gentlemen. $80,000. And this is a call that is heard across the countly. The auctioneer. They said no, and I said sold, subject to seller's confirmation for $35,000. This one is in South Florida. On a Saturday morning, hundreds of homes are put on the auction block, and there's another auction just like this one in Miami. Still another one in Dallas, Orlando. Every day, hundreds of homes are sold to the highest bidder. Nevada has the most foreclosed homes, followed by California, Arizona, and here in Florida. These auctions are luring bargain hunters searching for a steal, or just searching for their first home at a more reasonable price. There are beginning to be at least some small signs of hope. Nationwide, the foreclosure rate slowed somewhat in January over December, but the numbers are still up dramatically year to year. So the question is there an answer to this mess? A few days ago, I had a very interesting discussion with Elizabeth Warren. If you don't know the name yet, you soon will. She's a bankruptcy specialist and popular professor at Harvard Law School. She closely studies the American economy, foreclosures, and their dramatic effect on the middle class.
We have known that we are in a foreclosure crisis for more than a year now. And with each passing day, it's thousands of families who are moved out of their homes, and thousands more who hang on the edge trying to scramble and find a way not to fall over. And yet we have offered them nothing but empty promises. Hope for homeowners, other fancy named programs, big estimates on how many people were going to be helped. And what do the numbers eventually show? The number of people we've helped can be measured in the hundreds in an area in which we're talking about literally now millions of foreclosures. The sense of urgency, I don't know how to make it more intense than it is. These are families. These are families with children. These are older people who can't sell their homes and move to other facilities that they need to. These are people who can't leave Ohio to take a job in South Carolina because they can't sell their homes. This is a freezing up of the economy, not on Wall Street, but down at the family level. If we don't fix that problem, we cannot fix our economy. We just can't.
How do we get accountability out of the Congress, out of the President, out of the Secretary of Treasury? Because I know a lot of people, and I'm sure you do, who are just about at wit's end saying, I've had the SOS up for a long while, but there's no help coming.
That's right, and the water's rising fast. I think we now measure our tolerance in days. We no longer give months. We have been driven as a people to the edge with empty promises and free spending that has produced results that at best we cannot measure.
Well, what can be done? Can you give money, the government give money directly to people who are in the worst shape and indicate some possibility of getting out? What can be done now?
Well, there's some of that, but the mortgage crisis presents a somewhat different problem. The problem there is much more one of who's going to bear these losses. We've got houses that are now worth $100,000, let's say, but they have mortgages against them that are $140,000. And the mortgage on that house has been sold and sliced and diced and moved out and bundled and all the fancy things that have happened. And now you've got a family living there, and because of the crazy terms in this mortgage, they can't pay the $140,000 mortgage. There's no possible way. If this house gets foreclosed, they're going to be out of a house. And ultimately, here's the ironic part, the investors way on down the line, $100,000 house, they're likely to get somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 by the time you work through the process. Lose-lose for both groups. What we have to do is we have to find a mechanism to get them together and say, look, let's be realistic. Can you pay $100,000 for the house? Can you get yourself in a level mortgage? If you can, let's do it. And you got to eat the loss. This is
Mr.
profits
Investor,
on
Mr.
the upside. That's exactly what it's about. That's what your adventure here was about. Get these two things into alignment, and in the cases where families can pay for those homes, let's have them stay in those homes, let's stabilize those neighborhoods, and let's stop bringing tens of thousands more homes onto the market through foreclosure. We've just got a glut on the market now. Let's stop that and stabilize housing prices for everyone.
What about the banks? Do you make the banks, let the banks take the hit, lose out and close down? What do you do about the banks?
Well, partly they're the ones who took the profits, they're the ones who took the risks, and now it's time for them to recognize some of the losses. In a funny sort of sense, this isn't about bankruptcy, this is about reality. You can beat on this family all you want, but they're not going to produce $140,000 for this house. They just can't do it anymore. And the day we finally get realistic, we recognize the losses, we write down what we have to write down, we let some businesses go away, and we begin to count on the fact that those that are left really do have their feet on the ground, that it's solid all the way down, then we start to rebuild an economy.
Well, you've written a great deal about family economics and the middle class. Are we in danger, for all intents and purposes, losing the middle class, or is that too much of a fear?
No, I think that's the real fear. So here's what's happened over a generation. Somebody out working 40 hours a week is making less than he was making 30 years ago. Household income has gone up a little. How? Because we put the second earner to work, if she could do it. But that is now flattened out. There's no one else to put to work. We've put to work as many moms as we can possibly do. So where we stand now is income is flattened out again, but core expenses, housing, health insurance, transportation, child care, and taxes, because they've got these two salaries, have all gone up. And that's left the basic family with less money than they used to have a generation ago. So then we hit the skids of this recession. The bottom falls out of the housing market. They can't tap home equity. These crazy mortgages for many of them are forcing their expenses up. They're losing jobs. And that means we have, not a few people, we have literally tens of millions of Americans, hardworking, play by the rules, middle-class people, people who got decent educations, people who got decent jobs, people who got married, moved out, bought houses, the backbone of what we are as America. Those people are now hanging on by their fingernails.
If we lose the middle economic class, do we have in America approaching anything what we've known in my lifetime and yours and our father and mother's lifetime?
No, it's a different America. It becomes a two-class America. It may actually have a larger upper class. You know, maybe that moves to 10% of the population who really do quite well. You know, the kids, you can send the kids to college with no debt and they graduate with no debt. They do fine, nobody gets sick. You know, that's the group that works. And then what we have is a big underclass. It's folks who just live basically paycheck to paycheck. If you can hang on, if you don't get a layoff or a cutback in hours.
Or you don't get very ill.
And one of the kids doesn't get sick, if grandma doesn't fall and break a hip, if you don't get divorced or have a death in the family, you might be able to skirt through. But if anything goes wrong, you're living one pink slip, one bad diagnosis away from complete financial collapse.
Well, at the risk of enacting a cliche, let's pretend for a moment that I'm President Obama and I say to you, what can be done? What can be done now?
Well, the first thing has to be the home mortgages. We have to bring the parties together. We have to use the power of the law to say, I know that the interests have been sliced and diced. Get in here, get those $100,000, 30-year fixed mortgages in place, stabilize the family. It stabilizes not only the families and the bad mortgages, it stabilizes the communities, it stabilizes values for their neighbors. We've got to do that. Second thing we've got to do is we've got to worry about your other credit circumstances. Credit cards, financial products that are just holes in your pocket.
Car
money, car loans, money that's just draining out here.
What about the argument that says, listen, the government shouldn't try to do too much. The government should stay out of it. The less done, the better. It'll work itself out.
Well, you know, it's the old story. How long are we going to let this thing work its way out? How many generations? Because those are the kind of numbers we could be talking about. You know, this idealized notion, though, that we could live without a government, somehow these markets will go off, they'll straighten it out, families will do what they need to do, that just fits a world that doesn't exist anymore.
To see the meltdown of the middle class firsthand, travel to Fort Myers, Florida, like we did. It's there that a higher percentage of jobs have been lost than anywhere in the country. Right now in Lee County, the area surrounding Fort Myers, unemployment is near 10%, far above the national average. The folks here in Lee County, Florida know the economy is bad, but many are wondering just how much worse it's going to get. Last week, President Obama stopped in Fort Myers because it has one of the highest foreclosure rates in the country. Once vibrant middle-class neighborhoods are largely empty. You're struck by the lack of people. No kids on bikes. Nobody weeding the front yard. Nobody washing the family car in the driveway. Abandoned homes are the most visible sign of the hard times. But what happens when a home is repossessed or a person loses their job is harder to see.
We don't know what will happen tomorrow, but we can say about today, we will feed you, Lord, and we will feed your people, and we thank you for them.
In a small city park, only about a mile from where President Obama gave his speech last week, people of all creeds, ages, and colors line up for a free meal on Saturday afternoon. It's a burgeoning problem in the wealthiest nation on earth: hunger.
the symptoms of hunger are going to be here and growing nonstop. So I think we have to be super proactive. And
Sarah Owen is part of the Lee County Hunger Task Force, a self-appointed group of community organizers that have been meeting every week for 18 months trying to tackle this latest consequence of the mortgage crisis.
This area has been really impacted by the housing crisis that you're seeing all over the country. I often say Southwest Florida and this region's really kind of on the front of the wave. It began here, it's had its greatest impact here. The foreclosure rate is through the roof, the unemployment rate is through the roof. I think one of the most telling statistics that in our local school system, over 60% of the children are now on free or reduced lunch. It's directly tied to the housing. If you lose your job, you're going to be hungry. If you lose your house, you're going to be hungry. Hunger is a symptom of all other things that are going on in this region.
Owen runs an outreach center in Fort Myers, the Community Cooperative Ministries Incorporated, or CCMI.
Put it right there.
She says the number of people asking for the basics has risen dramatically.
A year ago, we were really looking at people who were chronically homeless, had been homeless for a period of time. Now what we're starting to see is people who have never had to reach out to ask for help before. We're seeing people who have worked for the last 20 years for a company, have supported their family, have lived a life in middle-class America, that are suddenly without jobs. They're suddenly on the verge of losing their home. They've lost their health care. And we're really having to come up with new approaches to meet the needs of these people and offer them long-term solutions in addition to that short-term help that they need.
I never in my life thought I would be homeless, having everything that I have had in the past.
At CCMI, we met Paul Clark. He's recently jobless and now homeless. He says when the housing boom stopped, so did the calls for work.
I'm a carpenter by trade. It's been my business, been my life, all of my life since I was 18, got out of high school. And the economy the way it is now, homes aren't being built. It's really hurt my profession, and I've never been without work, and I've never had a problem finding a job. And I'm struggling right now. I have a couple of prospects through contacts that I've met here. You know, hopefully they pan out. Hey, how you doing?
Paul Clark not only lost his house, he lost his car. Every day, twice a day, he hops a bus to the local library.
It's just every day there's more and more people, I mean, you try not to look homeless, you try and keep yourself clean or whatever, but it's just when you become homeless, you can look around and you can see them being on the streets, and going to the food pantries and going to the places that feed you dinner and lunches, and you see the people, and it's overwhelming, I'm actually on Craigslist, found a ceramic tile and stone installer job. I'm trying to get the reply email. Every morning I come down here, and then I come back in the afternoons after I've been out looking for jobs, and come back and see if I've got any response on my email from any of the jobs that I've been applying for. Just got to keep trying. Got to keep working at it. They're not gonna come to you. I've got to go to them. I mean, I would definitely like to say to people out there who still have their families together, number one, to think about the decisions you make, and you don't want to end up here. You don't want to end up where I'm at, and it's just it happens so quick, and it's in a blink of an eye. You can be going. You can have a beautiful home, your children running around, 2 nice vehicles, and from there to here, and it just it can happen overnight. It literally can.
There are many thousands of people with stories like Clark's across the country. And as more people lose their jobs and businesses shutter, we can expect the need to become even more acute. For those still holding jobs, they're also holding their money. That is not good news for Sam Galloway, the local Ford dealer. He's hurting, but he's still selling optimism.
First thing I think you should know is we need some positive press. instead of all the negative. I pick up the Fort Myers News Press, and I pick up the Wall Street Journal, and everything is negative, negative, negative.
And unfortunately, so is the bottom line at his Ford dealership. Galloway is surviving, but roughly 900 car dealers went out of business last year across the nation, and another 1,200 are expected to go out of business this year.
I sold 5,636 cars in 2005, and in 2008 I sold 2,029, which is a 64% decline. That's in new vehicles alone. So our business in Southwest Florida, automotive-wise, has been pretty well devastated.
But more than selling cars, or not selling them at the moment, Galloway worries about those going hungry in his own backyard, and he's determined to help.
We can correct this situation through some of the programs that are out there. For example, food can be purchased for 18 cents a pound. And when you take 10 pounds of chicken and 4 pounds of rice at 18 cents a pound, you have just probably fed, what, 40, 50 people chicken and rice. So it can be done. And those that have need to help those that don't have. It really comes back to something kind of basic. It's old cliche, love thy neighbor.
But love can only go so far. Galloway says he's had to cut back his charitable giving because of the economy. He's not the only one giving less, and fewer donations make Sarah Owen's job at the outreach center all the more difficult.
I can't stand the thought of anybody going hungry. A couple of weeks ago, we found a community where we found over 500 children who were eating no food over the weekend. And so their last meal was their free lunch on Friday afternoon, and then their next meal was Monday morning, and they were bringing brothers and sisters with them to share the meal. And literally, I couldn't sleep over the weekend thinking about that. When I first kind of arrived on the scene, my goal was in 10 years that my soup kitchen would be a museum, that we would have figured out a way to address the needs of the people who were homeless and looking for food. And now I'm just trying to think, you know, how will I feed people tomorrow? How will I help be a catalyst for this community to solve this issue?
Fort Myers, Florida. Coming up in a few moments on our program, the bailout money to the banks. Where, oh where did the billions go? That's next. Missed an edition of Dan Rather Reports? Or just want to see one again? We're now available on iTunes, so check us out. When Congress passed the $700 billion Emergency Economic Stabilization Act last October, the financial meltdown that is now so much a part of the national psyche had only recently exploded into the headlines. The stock market then was down big, and banks were failing or on the brink of collapse. President Bush's Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Paulson, was a respected veteran of Wall Street, and he seemed to many like the perfect person to manage the crisis. He became the face of the Bush administration, speaking directly to the press and to Congress. His message, trust me, give me the money, and I'll try to make sure everything turns out all right. So Congress gave him the money with few restrictions. But they did set up an oversight panel to try and track where the money was going and, quote, review the current state of financial markets and the regulatory system. They picked distinguished Harvard professor Elizabeth Warren to chair that panel, and she's been on the case ever since.
Secretary Paulson went to the Congress and said, I need money and I need it fast and I need a lot of flexibility on how to spend it. And Congress, believing they were facing an emergency, believing the Secretary of Treasury, said, we'll give you the money and we're going to give you a lot of flexibility, and we're going to put an oversight panel in place and an inspector general to check to make sure the checks go where they're supposed to. And You know, I understand that move. I really do. I understand it was a difficult choice for Congress, but I understand reasonably saying this is an emergency. You don't stand behind the firefighter and say, hey, spray a little more water over there and turn up your pressure and aim your hose this way. I understand that. You repose great confidence, you give great flexibility to the one on the front line who says, I've got to fix this problem, it's an emergency.
Does the Treasury Department have too much discretionary power in your judgment?
You know, this is a very hard choice. We're still in crisis. Indeed, the crisis has deepened since Secretary Paulson was...
By the way, there's no doubt in your mind about that.
No.
We're in a very deep downward spiral.
We are in a very deep crisis at this moment. We are in a very precarious position. So I still work with the firefighter metaphor. I think that having Congress try to point in different directions would not be the most effective way to design a system to get us out of this problem.
If we, the people, are to give the Treasury Secretary a lot of discretionary power, and his power comes from the president we've elected, then how much transparency do we have a right to demand, and how much should we practically demand?
100%. I'm sorry, I'm absolutely, there is no room for ambiguity here. Complete transparency.
However, it was anything but transparent. And Elizabeth Warren eventually found out when her panel started really looking into the deal. The American taxpayer, bluntly put, got taken. According to Warren, here's what happened. When then Secretary of the Treasury Paulson begged, some would say demanded, that Congress give this massive infusion of capital, he said the plan was to use it to buy up the bad mortgages-based assets that led to the financial collapse. But after the bill was passed, he abruptly changed course completely. His new approach was to invest taxpayer money into buying up equity in the banks themselves. He said that approach would help the banks, the markets, and the American taxpayer because, he said, these investments were fair.
The U.S. Treasury invested about $256 billion in their first series of transactions. Secretary of Treasury Paulson said when he invested it, this is just an investment on the part of the U.S. taxpayer. You're not going to lose your money. In fact, you may actually make money. And I sent him a letter, and the letter says, among other questions, are we getting a fair deal? For every $100 we're putting in, are we getting back stock and warrants worth $100? Secretary Paulson wrote a letter back to me, and he said, yes, these transactions are at or near par, which just means every time you put $100 in, you're getting $100 back in value. Right. Sounds fair, right? In other words, they're just using our money to try to defrost the system.
All right, that's what he said.
That's what he said, and he said it very clearly. Now, we could have stopped there, said thank you very much, we appreciate it, Secretary Paulson, check off the box. But we decided what we should do is make an independent investigation. And here was the bottom line. A lot of number crunching. For every $100 we put in, we got $66 back.
Well, that wasn't the deal.
That wasn't the deal. And here's the problem. You put in $100 and get 66 back. You do that often enough, and in this particular case, you end up about $78 billion short. That is what Secretary Paulson said was an even deal, missed by $78 billion.
I think people have trouble with this. Maybe boiling it down, you could say, it was either a dumb mistake, maybe that's overstating, but a mistake, or the people who designed it knew how it was going to go, but didn't level with we the people.
I think that's right. I wish I could say otherwise, but I think that's right.
You think they didn't level with us?
I know they didn't level with us. I mean, for Secretary Paulson to describe this as a par transaction after he had plenty of time to think about it, he didn't describe it just as a par transaction on the day it happened back in October. It was a letter December 30th addressed to me as chair of oversight, and he said, oh yes, that's what it was, a par transaction, 100 for 100. And the numbers just show flatly, it was not.
The loss of government funds, your tax dollars, is why Warren thinks oversight is so important. The new administration is still formulating the specifics of its bailout approach, and it's been widely criticized for a lack of specifics. Warren says regardless of who's in power, they must be held accountable. After all, the stakes for every American have seldom been higher.
We need to see it and see it all. It cannot be the case that there is a single American citizen who has any doubt about how these transactions are going forward, who's getting what kind of influence is brought to bear. We simply have no more room for that sort of thing.
Now, where's the mechanism that will demand and get that kind of transparency?
It's right here.
I'm looking at her.
No, I'm looking at him. I'll do it as best I can, but ultimately it's making sure that the American people are informed, engaged, and ready to speak up. That's what makes the real difference here.
Now, the president announced that he was capping pay for executives at banks receiving bailout money.
Yes.
I think that's a direct quote and certainly an accurate paraphrase. Now, immediately there are those people who say, listen, you can't do that, because if you do that, you're going to lose the best people, and you're not going to be able to recruit the best people. Do you believe that?
No. Lose the best people? Are we talking about losing the people who got us into this mess? And tell me exactly where it is they're going to go. You know, it's not like this is an industry that's desperate to hire more people to run these businesses. I want to tell you how it works in the world outside financial services and Treasury putting in billions of dollars. I work in the world of Chapter 11.
Bankruptcy.
That's right, bankruptcy. You take a big publicly traded company into bankruptcy, and what the data show is that the CEOs nearly always, A, lose their jobs, and B, never get a job anywhere else in a big
But
company.
you're in this world. I mean, you know this world. But again, for regular people, what can you say to them with such a system? We are a people who believe that our whole country is based on merit. That is, you perform well, you get a promotion, you get a raise, you do well. You don't perform well, you're off the team.
That's right.
What happened?
That's right. So far, Treasury is paying, and that means he who pays calls the tune. And the tune is that the CEOs get to stay. And they get to collect a lot of money while they do it.
Now, the new Treasury Secretary, Mr. Gettner, has announced changes for banks getting future funds. First of all, what are those changes? And the core question is, will those changes help?
Right now, we're getting the headline version. And I hate to say it, but in an area like this, the devil's in the details. So here's the good news. There are sounds coming from the other side of the wall. And the sounds are, we need to do more with transparency, we need to do more with accountability, we need to structure an overall plan. The sounds are there, but the details aren't in place yet. So we wait. But I want to be clear, this doesn't change my job in the slightest, because my job remains the same, and that's to keep asking the questions, to keep insisting that we need more transparency, more accountability, a clearer structure for how this plan is going to work. And I'll keep asking those questions regardless of who's sitting in the Treasury office.
Well, as everybody knows now, unless they've been on another planet, this started with the subprime loans. And when government first started talking about doing something, it was to help homeowners.
Yes.
Keep homeowners in the homes if they possibly can.
Yep.
Now, what have you learned about that? Are we succeeding in doing that? Have we even started to succeed in doing that?
You know, when Congress first allocated the $700 billion, one of the very few indications of direction that it gave to the Treasury Department was do something about mortgage foreclosures. Help find a way to stem this downward spiral that's giving us more foreclosures, dragging down housing prices, and in turn dragging down the whole economy. Not one step was taken in that direction under Secretary Paulson, not one.
That's going to strike a lot of people, including this person, as incredible. Is that true?
Well, we raised it in our December report, we raised it in our January report, and we have now raised it in our February report. Not 1 cent.
You did a special report on regulation. Take us back quickly over the last 25 years. What's happened to regulation or supposed to have happened to regulation?
So here's one way to look at it. In 1792, our young republic, George Washington as president, hits its first economic crisis. And credit markets freeze. Does this sound familiar? It almost brings the country to its knees. And here's what happens. About every 15 to 20 years, we have another crisis. We call them panics. We had different names for them.
Depression.
Depression, but they happen about every 15 to 20 years. For 140 years, the pattern is just unmistakable. Then we hit the Great Depression. And coming out of the Great Depression, we put 3 new regulations in place. Glass-Steagall, which divides our community banks, basically from the Wall Street investment banks. FDIC insurance, put money in a bank and know that it's safe. And some SEC regulations so you can invest on Wall Street and they can't cheat you too directly. That's what we put in place. For 50 years, we have no bank failures, no major crises. It works. Now, there's innovation, there's change. It's time to change regulations. It gets to be the early 1980s. And what do? Instead of saying new products, we need to change regulations to adapt, we take a different path. We say,
We allow banks to go in the insurance business and vice
let's
versa?
deregulate. That's exactly right. We begin to break down the old regulations. We say, who needs regulations? They're so months. We have been driven as a people to the edge with empty promises and free spending that has produced results that at best we cannot measure.
Well, what can be done? Can you give money, the government give money directly to people who are in the worst shape and indicate some possibility of getting out? What can be done now?
Well, there's some of that, but the mortgage crisis presents a somewhat different problem. The problem there is much more one of who's going to bear these losses. We've got houses that are now worth $100,000, let's say, but they have mortgages against them that are $140,000. And the mortgage on that house has been sold and sliced and diced and moved out and bundled and all the fancy things that have happened. And now you've got a family living there, and because of the crazy terms in this mortgage, they can't pay the $140,000 mortgage. There's no possible way. If this house gets foreclosed, they're going to be out of a house. And ultimately, here's the ironic part. The investors way on down the line, $100,000 house, they're likely to get somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 by the time you work through the process. Lose-lose for both groups. And yet, we have offered them nothing but empty promises. Hope for homeowners, other fancy named programs, big estimates on how many people were going to be helped. And what did the numbers eventually show? The number of people we've helped can be measured in the hundreds in an area in which we're talking about literally now millions of foreclosures. The sense of urgency, I don't know how to make it more intense than it is. These are families. These are families with children. These are older people who can't sell their homes and move to other facilities that they need to. These are people who can't leave Ohio to take a job in South Carolina because they can't sell their homes. This is a freezing up of the economy, not on Wall Street, but down at the family level. If we don't fix that problem, we cannot fix our economy. We just can't.
How do we get accountability out of the Congress, out of the President, out of the Secretary of Treasury? Because I know a lot of people, and I'm sure you do, who are just about at wit's end saying, I've had the SOS up for a long while, but there's no help coming.
That's right, and the water's rising fast. I think we now measure our tolerance in days. We no longer give money. When Congress allocated the $700 billion, one of the very few indications of direction that it gave was do something about mortgage foreclosures. Not one step was taken in that direction under Secretary Paulson. Not one.
My goal was in 10 years that my soup kitchen would be a museum, that we would have figured out a way to address the needs of the people who were homeless. And now I'm just trying to think, how will I feed people tomorrow?
Literally a year ago, to do 100 properties, 150, 175 properties in a day, we would have considered to be a very large auction. And now we'll do anywhere from 200 to 350 homes in a day.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports. Good evening. Tonight, some sobering straight talk about the United States economy. We aim on this broadcast to give you in-depth reporting, but also analysis, perspective, and context. We don't aim to be alarmist, but what you're about to hear tonight is worrisome and worth pondering. Here's a perfect example of what makes this a very troubling time. This is a neighborhood outside Fort Myers, Florida, but it could be many places in America. The signs are the same. Foreclosures are everywhere. Neighborhoods wiped out. More than 10,000 a day. That's right, 10,000 homes a day are taken back by banks across the country. In January, for the 10th month in a row, there were again more than 250,000 foreclosure filings. 1 in 6 American homeowners is underwater, a term used in the real estate industry that means the homeowners owe more than the home is worth. 1 in 6. In 2008, more than $3 trillion was lost in home value in America.
$80,000 practically free, ladies and gentlemen. $80,000.
And this is a call that is heard across the country. The auctioneer.
They said no, and I said sold, subject to seller's confirmation for $35,000.
This one is in South Florida. On a Saturday morning, hundreds of homes are put on the auction block, and there's another auction just like this one in Miami. Still another one in Dallas, Orlando. Every day, hundreds of homes are sold to the highest bidder. Nevada has the most foreclosed homes, followed by California, Arizona, and here in Florida. These auctions are luring bargain hunters searching for a steal, or just searching for their first home at a more reasonable price. There are beginning to be at least some small signs of hope. Nationwide, the foreclosure rate slowed somewhat in January over December, but the numbers are still up dramatically year to year. So the question is there an answer to this mess? A few days ago, I had a very interesting discussion with Elizabeth Warren. If you don't know the name yet, you soon will. She's a bankruptcy specialist and popular professor at Harvard Law School. She closely studies the American economy, foreclosures, and their dramatic effect on the middle class.
We have known that we are in a foreclosure crisis for more than a year now. And with each passing day, it's thousands of families who are moved out of their homes and thousands more who hang on the edge trying to scramble and find a way not to fall over.